Well, thank you to George Washington University Central Asia program, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And it's always good to see you, Sebastian. So great to participate in this. And thanks to everyone who's attending the event. I'm going to give some background on Karakol-Pakistan and something a little bit about Uzbekistan in general. And I hope what I will say won't will help to give those who aren't extremely well versed in Karakol-Pakistan some details and better understand the situation there. The Karakol-Pakistan Sovereign Republic accounts for roughly 38% of territory of Uzbekistan. There are, according to figures released by the Uzbek government in August 2021, there are a little bit more than 750,000 ethnic Karakalpaks in Uzbekistan. Obviously, not all of them live in the Karakalpakstan Republic, but there's 750,000 in Uzbekistan. It is the poorest region in Uzbekistan. It's mainly desert. Over the years, there have been allegations of discrimination against the Karakalpaks, although I know that other people have told me when I've had this conversation that there's generally been discrimination against many groups, including Uzbeks in Uzbekistan too. But among some of the allegations of discrimination against Karakalpaks from the last 20 years, I've heard tales of forced sterilization of young women. And again, to be fair, these accusations are made and include women who are non-Karakalpak also, but I've heard it most about Karakol-Pakistan. The ecological conditions in the region have been deteriorating for decades. Uzbekistan's section of what was the Aral Sea is in Karakol-Pakistan, and within just the last few decades, it's dried up to being almost nothing. So the people in the region, this is well within living memory. Anyone living in Karakol-Pakistan anytime in the last 30 years will have seen the conditions get worse out there in their region. But at the same time, this region is rich in oil and natural gas. There's, by some estimates, conservative estimates, there's 1.7 trillion cubic meters of natural gas in Karakol-Pakistan, and there could be 2 or 3 times that much. Now, to put that in some perspective, the European Union, prior to this year, was importing 150 to 160 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia, right? So the amount of gas they have in Karakol-Pakistan is huge. And that's where we find most of the big recent gas fields and where the biggest exploration is going on in the country. At the same time, that all this money, in some ways, it's parallel to what we see in Western Kazakhstan. This is where all the money is being made. This is where all the country is getting a huge share of its revenue. And yet hasn't been much of a trickle-down effect in Karakol-Pakistan. Like I said, it remains the poorest country in the region, in the country. So I'll give current president Shavkat Mirziyoyev some credit for paying more attention to Karakol-Pakistan than his predecessor Islam Karimov did, certainly. But at the same time, again, you're starting from a very low base here, and since so much of the money, so much of the revenue for Uzbekistan has been coming out of this region, and more recently, Uzbekistan has had its own gas problems, right? So it's a vital region for Uzbekistan in that sense that the country's gone from being a gas exporter to becoming a gas importer. So Karakol-Pakistan is the key to a lot of problems in Uzbekistan. It is an important region for the whole country and all the people in it. Now, for almost 100 years now, Karakol-Pakistan has been a unique entity, no matter what country it was part of, right? It was actually an autonomous region within the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic at the very start in 1924. It became a part of the Kazakh Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic after that. It briefly was its own autonomous Soviet republic before being joined to Uzbekistan. And then we know after, in 1990, it adopted its first constitution, which gave it the right to secede. And of course, that's a big part of our discussion today. That was where the origins of its right to secede came. In 1990, it adopted a new constitution in 1993, which had the same kind of benefit, on paper anyway, benefits for the region. It was supposed to be still a sovereign region. It was supposed to hold a referendum in 20 years, although the Constitution gives it the right to hold a referendum on secession anytime it wants, but it was supposed to hold one 20 years after the passing of the Constitution, which did not happen. That should have been in 2013. There were a few people who mentioned that in the years leading up to 2013, but they were run out of the country by the authorities or for fear of being locked up. So, but it has maintained, although it's poor, it has always maintained this interesting status, right? I suppose it's something that the people can identify with, that they have their own specific territory out there. I mentioned there was 750,000 Karakalpaks. There's, again, I don't know how many of those actually, most of them probably live in Karakol-Pakistan. I couldn't say exactly how many, but the total population of the Karakalpak Republic is 2 million. So they do not make up the majority, even in Karakol-Pakistan, which kind of shows that if they did have a vote on secession, you have to wonder how it would go. That said, I will mention that there has really never been any, until July 1st, there was never any unrest or violence out in Karakol-Pakistan that I can ever remember. There wasn't any huge protests or anything that prompted some kind of government crackdown, which is why July 1st was such a strange event, because we'd never seen anything like this happen before. Those are pretty much the facts about Karakol-Pakistan. And what I'm going to say now is more of how I've been watching, what I've seen from watching what's been happening in Karakol-Pakistan. And we know on July 1st, there was a big protest. We know they detained the protest, who they, at least authorities say was the protest leader. There seems to be some merit to that, Daulat Taji Muratov. The protest was still peaceful. He was supposedly outside the administration building with one of the heads of the administration, and the crowd was calmed down. It was really when the security forces and police moved in and tried to disperse the crowd that the violence broke out. So there's a lot of questions about what was the spark that started all this violence. Now there's a lot of questions about what the investigation is finding out. And of course, we don't know everything about it. The Uzbek government, as you know, formed an independent commission Most of the members are members of the government. It's true, although they do have, Steve had mentioned that Azam Farmonov, who's a human rights activist, is part of that. But trying to look at this from the point of view of the Karakalpaks, who seem to be the majority of the people who are detained in this. While there are some Karakalpaks on the panel, there are people who are associated or believed to be closely associated with the government. So there's a lot of questions about how independent the independent commission is. I will give them credit to some members of the commission anyway, who are on Twitter all the time and are talking about what the progress in this investigation. However, we don't get very many facts. We have their side of it. I also am watching on Twitter for people who are members of Karakalpak rights groups, activist groups, too, and what they say in response to these tweets that come from government officials. So they are looking into it, but there's a lot of blank spots here. I hope that the officials say that they're independent and impartial in investigating this, and I hope that's true. But there's a lot of facts that they aren't willing to reveal so far to the public. Among them, they say that NGOs are involved, but to date, I have not heard any of the names of any of the NGOs that are actually involved in this. We are told that the people that are detained, and there was more than 500 people detained in the wake of this, right, that we know of, that the government says, that the people are not being mistreated, and that they have access to lawyers. But we don't know this from the people or the relatives themselves. This is what we're told. It's constantly one of the facets of this investigation is some parts of it are held to be secret, or they can't release the information now. But unfortunately, it leads to a lot of questions about how this investigation is actually proceeding at the moment. We have photos of people that they are talking to, and sometimes it's only the back of the head of the people. And in fact, Taji Muratov, they had just put up photos of him being questioned by a member, talking to people of members of the commission, but it was only from the back of his head, so we don't know. We are assured that he is in good health, that he has no complaints about his prison conditions, that he's not suffering any ill treatment, and that he does have access to attorneys at the moment. But we don't hear him saying that himself. Now, the last thing I want to say here is although, again, I hope that the members of the commission are acting in good faith and living up to all the promises that they're making on there. But the general impression of the Uzbek authorities, if you're in a room with a bunch of people from, even if it's an independent commission, these are government officials, the history of Uzbekistan would suggest that you're in a lot of problem. You have a big problem here. You're in a lot of trouble because, generally speaking, once you are detained, you are presumed to be guilty. That's the history of the country. Now, I know they're trying to change that, but that is the history of Uzbekistan. If you're called in and put in a room and you're being questioned, the chances are, for everyone in the country, you're going to think you're on the edge of going to prison, right? And you're not, for the relatives or other people who are being brought in as witnesses, who have to live there. They have no hope of getting out of this country. So they have to live in Karakalpakstan and Uzbekistan for the rest of their lives. So you have to be very, very careful about what you're going to respond, what your response is going to be to these kind of questions, because you have to wonder if there might not be retaliation somewhere down the road. People are paying attention now. So things seem to be proceeding civilly at the moment. But if you're 20, 30 years old and looking at living there the rest of your life, and you're being questioned by members of this commission, some of whom are members of the government, you're probably not going to be entirely candid about the situation. And I think that's a real shame, because they do have a golden opportunity to lend more credibility to this by allowing some independent people to participate in this. And certainly one would be Steve Sperlo, who you're going to hear from at the end of this presentation. But I know, for instance, there's a highly respected journalist who's in the Kuz today, and could be included in some of these sessions too, questioning both the detained and witnesses and relatives of the detained, to add a little bit more credibility to this. Because again, as I said, generally, and I myself have been picked up by various law enforcement agencies in Uzbekistan, and it's an intimidating few hours to sit in the room with a bunch of people who have very unsympathetic looks. A lot of times, I'm not saying the members of the commission are like that, have this stern look, but still, most people in the back of their mind are going to wonder if anything that they say that contradicts the authorities' narrative will not end up landing them in a lot of trouble further down the road. So I think I'll just leave it there and leave time for the other guests and maybe some questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce.